The prelude this morning is entitled Piano Song and is written by Paul Haley.
Thank you, Bruce. That was wonderful as usual, but I sure wish we could hear it in person. Good morning. Welcome to the Treasure Coast Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Stuart, Florida. Today's August 30th, amazing 2020, such a year. My name is Janet Groat, and I'll be your worship associate today. We're happy to have Victoria Poling in our pulpit today. Victoria recently completed her Master's of Divinity at Seattle University, and she's a UU ministerial aspirant, and her ministry is focused on creative healing. It includes spiritual direction, outdoor rite of passage, sounds cool, preaching, and spiritual deepening workshops for long-term justice work. She lives in Seattle and is a member of the fellowship in Port Townsend. And a big thanks to those who helped with the service today. Bruce Ruby, our musician, our Zoom host, Karen Frank, and also Karina Poloni and Ronnie Dembowski. We'll mute you to avoid any background noise. Please keep yourself muted. We are a welcoming congregation. We welcome people of all gender identities, all races, all ages, all backgrounds. We're having Zoom services every Sunday at 11 o'clock. You'll find announcements in our Friday newsletter. If you want to get onto the newsletter and ultimately be able to join our Zoom services, go to tucc.org and sign up for the email newsletter link. And once you get that newsletter, then you'll get an invite for the live services rather than just seeing them on YouTube at a later date. These days, you see only our minister, Bob, and Karina, our religious education director. And we do have another member of the staff, Debbie, who's here weekdays for us and really holds us together. And of course, the church building itself still has its needs. It needs attention. So if you can see the online giving link on the website, or if you just want to send a check to 21 Southeast Central Parkway, Stuart, Florida, 34997. Thank you. Now I'm going to light the chalice. Two, place on fire. We light this flame for the art of sacred understanding, humbled by all that we cannot fathom in this time. We come into the presence of what we do know, that love is now and forever, the only answer to everything and everyone in every moment. Today, let's celebrate the many seasons of our lives. There is one amongst us who is 104 years old, Regina Lupo. Amazingly, she still lives with her daughter, Roberta Linares. We miss them both if we haven't seen them in the Zoom services. But center yourself for a moment. Imagine that we are in the narthex and we are greeting Regina. Regina wrote this poem, which was published in 1998, Elderly Neighbor. She knew right well that the dust would lie where it has never lain. The dishes would pile up too high beneath the window pane. The garden would grow full of weeds and the insects would have a feast while she was sowing friendship seeds, neighborliest at least. Now that the end's almost in sight, the hour growing late, she tries to make friends left and right, chatting at the garden gate. Now we're going to sing hymn number 396, I Know This Rose Will Open.
I know this rose will
for our affirmation. We're going to speak the first and sing the second. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace,
to seek the
truth and love,
and to help one
another.
From all that dwell skies, let songs of faith and promise, let beauty, truth, and good be sung from every land by every tongue.
Now we're going to have Karina Poloni, our religious education director, read us a story for all ages. Now we're going to go to our ritual of joys and sorrows. I'll share a stone moving across the river of our lives, rolling down. Please raise your hand and Karen will call on you if you do have a joy or a sorrow. She'll unmute you so you can talk. Are we all good today? Is that possible? Well, at that rate, I am going to share a stone for all of us who are able to find joy today. Joy of being together is just very, very special. And I'm going to share a stone for those whose sorrows are too private to share. Know that our hearts are with you. Now, here is Victoria Poling.
Friends, let us hold our joys and sorrows gently. May we be grateful for this moment when we hear one another in the silence. Let us lift one another up the way we might lift a small child into a swing. May we feel also the bitter sweetness of growth and of loss, and a changing season of starting over. Let us look carefully and with a steady gaze at what is broken and torn, and turn ourselves to the work of making our world whole. May it be so. I'm going to share a reading with you today, and if you happen to have your gray hymnal at home, you are welcome to follow along. It's number 558. This reading is called For Everything a Season, and it comes from a classic text in the Hebrew scriptures from the book Ecclesiastes, which means, translated, teacher. It's a wisdom book. And so this is chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to pluck up what has been planted. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to break down, and a time to build up. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. a time to throw away stones, and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace, and as we know during COVID, a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. This ends our reading, and now will you please join me in singing a hymn of petition called Spirit of Life by Jason Shelton. The words will be found on your screen. Good morning, and thank you so much for your generous welcome. I am thrilled to be here today with you, and I want to thank everyone behind the scenes, and particularly Karen Frank, who invited me to join you as a guest speaker. She and I were members of the same church in a small town called Port Townsend near Seattle for many years. Today I am zooming in from Seattle, from the Pacific Northwest, and I am so grateful to call this place my home. It's quite early here, it's 8:30, and I'm looking out my window just beyond my screen at some beautiful evergreens. And I'm very aware that at this time of year, we're having what we call late summer. It's a distinct season in and of itself, which I imagine is probably quite different from where you are in Stewart. So here in late summer, we have the great joy of being able to start harvesting wild blackberries. And just this week, my housemate and her 9-year-old daughter and I went and we harvested blackberries and we made pie together. And that taste of blackberry pie for me is just the epitome of late summer. So that is the season that we're having here right now. Another season for me is as someone who is in formation to become a UU minister. As you heard, I recently finished my degree, and I have been spending the summer reading up on UU history. And I've been doing this especially because I'm looking for clues on how to respond to the times that we are living in today. This is a time to seek and a time that I see as needing to refrain from embracing the status quo. this is a time of loss and of throwing away what no longer works. And I believe it's also a time of gathering up stones from our tradition as Unitarian Universalists. Long-lived bedrock that is solid and true. I'm speaking, of course, of the times of the great upwelling of protests around police brutality. And I'm also speaking, of course, of the run-up to an election, which I'll touch on more in a moment. I just want to step back a little bit and note that some of you here are probably quite familiar with your UU history. Perhaps you are lifelong UUs, and so you know many of the stories of our history of doing important anti-racism work. You know of those folks who ushered in changes in the church and in our culture and our nation during times like the abolitionist movement, people like Theodore Parker. Or perhaps you know about Reverend Ethelred Brown, one of the first African-American Unitarian ministers who founded the Harlem Unitarian Church in New York, who was deeply influential in supporting that community. Perhaps you lived the unfolding of UU history in Selma during the Civil Rights Movement, or you experienced the empowerment controversy in 1967. Perhaps you are also very aware of having witnessed decades, unfortunately, of missed opportunities in Unitarian Universalism. Opportunities to fully fund and support Black ministries, members and friends, lay leaders and ministers. Many others of you likely joined Unitarian Universalism later in life, finding your way to a community and falling gratefully into the embrace of a church that accepted you where you felt you belonged. And this is true for me. I found my way to the Unitarian Church in my late 20s. I keep learning more about who we are as a church. And so one of my commitments in my ministry is to keep learning history. And so I'd like to share some of what I have learned with you today, particularly from a book that I highly recommend, and I am going to do a little book recommendation. I know it's backwards for you, probably on video, but this book is called Darkening the Doorways. It's by Reverend Mark Morrison Reed, who is a minister in our UU tradition and a historian, a scholar, and he is also an African American. And this book is about Black trailblazers and missed opportunities in Unitarian Universalism. I would encourage you very much to get together on Zoom, perhaps in a book group, to read through the short historical sketches that he and others, his collaborators, have written up about Black Universalists and Unitarians and UUs. This work has given me, as a student of our tradition, a much deeper look into the way in which white UU history has been told without the existing Black voices. And as a white UU, this is not something I had been aware of before. And I also became aware of how difficult it is to reconstruct these stories from the historic records. One of the stories that stands out to me, in particular, is of Reverend William Jackson. He was an abolitionist, Black and Baptist minister who in 1850 organized a group that successfully rescued the first man to be detained in prison in Philadelphia under the newly enacted Fugitive Slave Act. So he went with the group, they conducted a jailbreak, they freed this man, and for this, Reverend Jackson was arrested for his act of civil disobedience. The community of his church immediately rallied, obtained a writ of habeas corpus from a judge, and freed him and released him from his arrest. Contrast this experience of supportive church community, all in it together in the work of fighting slavery at the time. In 1860, Reverend Jackson attended the American Unitarian Association. He was undergoing a change of heart. He was starting to believe that all people could be saved. And so he was invited by a friend to go attend the Unitarian Conference. He was so moved by a sermon during this experience that he stood up in front of the assembled body and he declared his conversion to Unitarianism in front of all the members. A white minister then advocated on his behalf and asked the association to take up a collection because Reverend Jackson's church had some debt. And this minister, who was acting as an ally and a bridge, wanted to support Reverend Jackson to bring him into the fold. And so a collection was taken up. However, it was minimal. It was about 1/8 of the amount that was raised at that same assembly for a white minister who had a church in Kansas. There are no further records of collegial support for Reverend William Jackson. So while this act could have led to one of the first Black-led congregations with a Unitarian minister, instead, Reverend Jackson went back to his church, remained Baptist, and then later joined the U.S. Army as a chaplain, where he became the first Black man to be commissioned as an officer. Clearly a leader with deep convictions. What a missed opportunity. I was moved by this story because it brought me, as a white UU, face to face with the tragedy and the reality that there could be so many more lay leaders and ministers in our tradition who are Black and who are people of color. And that this situation of being funded partly, but not enough, has occurred again and again. These are people who could be your ministers and my colleagues. People who have the personal and conviction and strength to free detainees and lead our faith into the future. I grieve this lack of funding for Reverend Jackson back in 1860, and yet even as I grieve this, I'm aware that I can't even fully imagine what I'm grieving for and what could have been. This loss has an unknown shape. What has a known shape is the time we are in now, the season that we are in now. And as you know from the news, it is a time when police continue to disproportionately kill citizens of this nation who are Black. How many missed opportunities are there for every life that ends too soon? This is a time of active protests and of movements led by Black and Indigenous and people of color. And this is a time of fierce pointed political positions in the run-up to an election in which our former president, Barack Obama, is saying that the future of our democracy is at stake. These are serious times. I ask you, and you are likely asking yourselves with some anguish, what can be done to address the persistent and systemic racism in our country now, at this time? And you're probably asking yourselves, what can I do as a member of a small church in Florida? I would suggest from our reading today, which says there's a time to break down and a time to build up, I suggest that there will be more breaking down before there's building up. The status quo will need to be fought and shed before the building can happen. And I'm becoming ever stronger in my conviction that this is a time when people who are not Black are being called to look and listen and notice and deepen our understanding of the systems that we live in, and to take action, to learn what it means to have a white identity, or an identity as someone like myself with Hispanic heritage and a family who worked to become white. This is important work. And we, as Unitarian Universalists, no matter how small or large our congregations, are called to do this work because of our deep history. As you all know, this week, Jacob Blake was shot in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And the media footage showed us fire burning in desperate an angry protest. And this fire highlighted against the night a glowing reader board sign. It was a sign belonging to the Bradford Unitarian Universalist Church. And the sign proclaimed Black Lives Matter. This sign and this moment is a call. We're being called to recommit to our ongoing commitment as a faith tradition to do our anti-racism work. After so much loss, we need a map into the world, like our young friends in the story, who drew a picture for her neighbor Bob, who had lost his wife. How can we come together to create a map of hope, of courage, of joy, of humor, of grace? There are going to be many ways in which we can do this. And what each of us does individually depends on who we are connected to and close with. And so I wonder what time it might be for you as Treasure Coast UU. How does your history as a church, as a body, an institution, how is your vision of who you are together and your web of relationships going to inform who you will be and how you will act now? How will you follow the leadership of people of color in these times? I ask because you will need each other. Anti-racism work has been, and I think always will continue to be transformational for those of us who lean in, who take steps, who make a practice of it. And transformation is an epic struggle. It's the stuff that gives us our most passionate and powerful heroic stories that begin with a hero or a heroine and a small group of traveling companions who set out to make that new map of the world, one that has never been seen before. So your church and your covenant groups, your social and environmental action groups, your church is such a fellowship of traveling companions. As a faith tradition, UUs have such a deep and rich tradition of encouraging the individual free and responsible search for truth and meaning. This is one of our strengths. And now it's not enough to focus on our individual growth alone, to name and claim what we believe, because a voice blazing a trail in the wilderness is one voice alone. In the collective, where you all are together, there's greater strength. I encourage you that this is a time to side with others and join together with the larger UU movement. For example, getting involved in the Side with Love campaign. Siding with love looks like siding together. And we are a bold people with an honorable history. We can do this, and you can do this. So I urge you to take a deep breath. We've heard a lot. This has been a serious conversation today. And when you wonder what you might do even today, I suggest that you can turn to some very practical and useful tools that have already been created for you. They've been developed by the UU Service Committee and UU The Vote and Side with Love, and you can research them online. They've been ongoing for many years. And these are wonderful ways for smaller congregations to receive support from one another for doing anti-racist work. So you're not trying to figure out what to do and how to do it all by yourselves. I really encourage yourself in such times to allow yourself to lean on and fall back on our tradition, on the larger movement. And let yourself be supported by joining in collective actions that leaders in our tradition are already organizing. You really don't have to do this all by yourself, and it will feel good to take an action step. We are accountable to our covenant of care for one another, and accountability doesn't have to be frightening. In fact, it can be deeply creative. It can call us into more satisfying and fulfilling relationships with one another as we take steps towards justice. I suggest that when we do this work, we are creating not only a safe space, but a brave space. A place where we can be brave enough to speak from the heart about our fears and our hopes. A place where that honesty generates energy and creativity, where leaps of creative possibility can happen. That creative possibility, that thing that comes to you, where you get that energy to start moving and start doing. Some call that grace. And to me, changing my mind about what to do and how to do it and joining with other people is one of the surest ways I know of grace working in the world. So today I come before you as a ministerial student on the path to ordination, and as a white woman who's made and will make many more mistakes in my anti-racism work. As someone who's daring to fail and ask others to, and risking being told how I'm behaving in racist ways, I want to ask you to join me in this. I want to know and learn how to love better, to be in deeper relationship with others, and I hope that you can join me there. I hope that you'll join each other as a group to encourage and support one another in small daily acts of justice making, whether it's writing a postcard, sending an email, joining a book group, going to a protest, texting or calling someone on the phone who's going to a protest to encourage them. Whatever it is that you can do in a small way every day, I hope that you can let this work of justice be the rose that opens, that returns you home to your soul. This call to anti-racist work as a church is a call to fall in love more deeply with the world and with one another, and with capital R reality as it is, or however you use your terms to know God. There's a greater experience of life and love that awaits each one of us, of that I am sure. Now is the season for more love. May it be so. And now I invite you to please join me in singing hymn number 1064 in your teal hymnal if you have it. The words will be on your screen, the ever joyful Blue Boat Home.
Standing on these mountains and plains, far away from the rolling ocean, still my dry land heart can say, I've been sailing all my life now, never harbor or have I known. Why is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my view. Sun, my sail, and moon, my brother, as I ply the starry sea, leaning over the edge in wonder, casting questions into the deep. Drifting here with my ship's companions, all wicked kindred pilgrim soul, making our way by the lights of the heavens in our I give thanks to the ways upholding me. Hail the great winds urging me on. Breathe the infinite sea before me. Sing the sky my sailor song. I was born upon the fathoms, never harbor port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat. Oh.
We clasp the hands of those who go before us, and we clasp the hands of those who come after us. We hold one another's hands in a circle, welcoming in that spirit of life and love that grows our circle and makes it wider still. Friends, may you go forth in this day, held in the beauty of light and love that is your church and your fellowship.
Now, let's extinguish the chalice. May we be reminded here and now of our highest aspirations, and remember to bring our gifts of love and service to the altar of humanity. May we know that we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery, in miracle, to the universe, to this community, and to each other. After the postlude, please put yourself into gallery mode, and all us Zoomers get to visit, and maybe Dana can tell us about those blackberries.
The postlude this morning is turn, turn, turn to everything there is a season.
Wonderful.